Hello, everybody. Um, I'm not sure how many of you are listening right now. Uh, Sound condition is okay?
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Can hear you. And lecture series 1 and 2, have you already listened it?
Yes, sir.
Yes, okay. I don't know how many of you here right now.
Sir, 8 of us are here right now.
About 8.
Yes, sir. The rest are
Okay,
joining.
I see. Okay, okay. We'll start now. All right, good. Yeah, okay. Today we'll go on lecture number 3, but before starting lecture number 3, do you have any questions about lecture 1 and 2? So far, no questions?
No, sir. No questions in particular. But
Okay.
if
Hmm.
you could find a little bit of time to re-explain the diamond formation which you talked about in the lecture,
Okay,
the
okay. We'll
it would.
proceed to lecture 3, and then end of this lecture, any questions I will accept. Okay, you can
Yes, sir.
come up anything. We'll
Yes, sir.
discuss
Good
it.
idea.
Yeah, yeah. Excuse me. What is your name, please? Huh?
Sir, my name is Azam.
Azam. Ah,
Yes, sir.
yes, yes. I mind. You are always in my next door. Yeah. Okay, we'll go on. Lecture number 3. All right. Now, I think you remember last time we discussed about, say, um, the political economy of international trade, and then 7 main instruments which the government has, and then we have already discussed tariffs, subsidies, import quotas, voluntary export restraints, VER. Okay, another 3 we will discuss today again. Okay, first, local content requirements. This is, I think, you are already familiar in Pakistan. In Pakistan, there are Toyota car, Honda car, and Nissan cars. And your government imposing Japanese manufacturers, car manufacturers, to use local contents. Well, sometimes, for example, 75% of the components parts of this products or car, for example, I don't know exactly what number now, must be produced locally or locally supplied. Or in value terms, 75% of the total value of the cost value of this product must be produced locally. Well, just to encourage the local suppliers. Okay, that is a local content requirements. This 75%, this is just an example. It's not the actual numbers. Okay, and then the other things is administrative trade policies. Well, this is actually some governments wants to have some barriers to give some obstacles to increasing numbers, increasing quantities of the imports. Okay. In general, WTOs these days, free trade are encouraged, and this kind of trade barriers is not good. But any government has a bureaucratic rules designed to make it difficult for imports to enter a country. A notorious one, I know that before I come here, I'm working for some companies, and then some of my friends, Japanese friends, wanted to import Pakistani mango. Pakistani mango is quite delicious, and then price is very good, but Japanese quarantine requirements is very high, has to have a very strict rules. So it was very difficult. This is a kind of the administrative trade policies. Okay, Japanese are very skillful and notorious this kind of administrative trade policies. Always we are criticized. One of the famous historic things happens. The French governments imposed Japan to delay the customs clearance service for too much video cassette recording export to the France. Every year, imports of the Japanese cassette record in the France increased about 100%, 100%. Oh God, it is too much. 1980s, I remember when I was in UK. French government did, it's rather very fantastic idea. They put the customs office for the Japanese products in a very remote and rural area, which is a Tours and Poitiers. Tours and Poitiers, some of you maybe knows that there's a famous historic place, which was the Battle of Tours Poitiers, which is your famous Umayyad Caliphate, that is the Muslim troops, try to invade in the 8th century in France. And then French army defeated the Muslim, so French didn't become Muslim country. Anyway, so this is a historic places. So therefore, this is something like a joke to prevent Japanese invasion of the VCR. So put it in the Tours Poitiers for customs service. Well, this is a kind of administrative trade policies, okay? And there are various methods. And the other one is anti-dumping policies. That is very favorite policies, always practiced by the United States. One time, Japanese were criticized for anti-dumping for Japanese textile industry. That was 1950s, 60s. And Japanese steels also criticized anti-dumping, 1970s. All right, we talked each time with the American governments. And then, about say 1980s, 90s, now it's the South Korea manufacturers semiconductors selling at below their cost of productions. So United States criticized South Koreans. Well, this kind of anti-dumping policies. And to counter the dumping, importing countries impose anti-dumping duties. Nowadays, you remember that the American government is imposing 25%, 50% duties against Chinese products, or some other reasons. This is so-called countervailing duties. That is anti-dumping policies. Okay. And then, so far, this is the main typical instruments. Okay. Then, what is the basic concept behind government interventions? There are two basic concepts. One is a political reason, the other one is economic reasons. Political reason is protecting the interests of certain groups within the nations. Okay. In the United States, they have to protect their semiconductor manufacturers. And also United States, they have to protect their automobile industry workers, GM, Ford, and Chrysler. Well, already about more than 50% of the American car markets was already occupied by the foreign cars, including Japanese cars. So lots of workers lost jobs in Detroit, GMs also they suffered. So normally,
Assalamualaikum, sir.
yes. Any questions? Any questions so far?
No,
Are
sir.
you okay?
No, sir. Yes, sir. Everything is quite clear.
All right. Okay. Good. Well, normally these political reasons or government intervention is to protect the producers, because the workers of the manufacturing factory lose job. All right. Too much Japanese cars, Korean cars, Chinese cars in certain countries, and then if they lose the market, and then they have to reduce their production, then they have to reduce their workers. The workers will lose the job. Who is the sufferer? Is the consumers. Consumers, well, if the government impose more heavy duties and they have to buy the more expensive cars because of the duties, so then consumers is suffering. So normally the producers are getting benefits and consumers are losing. So that is the political reasons in achieving some political objectives. All right. American, say, representatives in their parliaments or so, or senators, their constituents has a big pressure to their representatives. We are suffering, so then impose more tax, more tariffs, duties. That is political reasons. The other ones is economic reasons. Okay, this is a very good ones, concerned with boosting the overall wealth of a nation to the benefit of all, both producers and consumers. These are the two streams of concepts behind government intervention. Okay, so far, any question? All right. Are you following?
Yes, sir.
All right, good. Now,
Yes,
I'll
sir.
continue.
Everything is good.
Yes, sir.
Now,
Ji.
there are the political arguments for interventions.
Kulamba.
Number one, protecting jobs and industries, which is understandable. Okay, if there are too much in Japan, for example, our clothes, shirts, undershirts, and even pants are coming from China, and most of our textile industry lost the markets. In the United States, half of the automobile markets lost because of the foreign cars, Japanese, Koreans, right? So protecting jobs and industries. This is arguments. And then the other one is national security. National securities are related to the defense industry. During the Gulf War, you remember 1990s, there was a American or coalition army advanced to the Arabian Gulf, about 500,000 soldiers. And then mostly Americans, they operated some jet fighters against Iraq. And about, say, for example, 1 hour jet fighter operation, how much parts they have to replace after 1 hour battle and coming back to the base? Surprisingly, 30,000 US dollars equivalent parts has to be replaced for the maintenance purpose. Most of them semiconductors parts. Okay, and then these are mostly Japanese made ones. So semiconductor is a closely related to national security, especially for defense. For example, in the United States, Sematech is a consortium of 14 US semiconductor companies. Okay. US governments provided Sematech with about $100 million per year in subsidies to protect their industries. Okay. So this is because of the national security purposes. The other things is the retaliations. Well, as you know, these days, President Trump is very much angry about the Chinese manufacturers' plagiarism and copying their intellectual properties. So therefore, US has used the threat of the punitive trade sanctions to force Chinese government to abide by its intellectual property rules. Okay, this is something like a retaliations. Okay, all right. Now the other ones is protecting the consumers. Well, this happens. I still remember when I was in Japan, 1990s. There were mad cow meat problems. Some of the American meat came from the cow. That cow had something damaged by the mad, some virus or something, or some properties, foods, or I don't know. Well, especially sensitive. Now, Japan is importing quite a lot of American meat, and also UK, and also France, right, and South Korea. So, and we had a very much serious discussion with the United States, and we settled anyway. Now, Madca meat problem was solved. And then another one is a hormone-treated beef case with EU. EU is quite sensitive about this kind of hormone-treated because to encourage or promote their early growth, just like in Pakistan, I think you are using the steroid to promote or make it faster to grow for your chickens. Okay, steroid is very dangerous and hazardous to your kidney. Okay, so therefore your government is prohibiting to use the steroid to make faster growth for chickens, but still somewhere is used. I've heard it as a rumor. So these ones, protecting consumers, okay, and then furthering foreign policy. Yes. Any questions? Okay. Some problems. Number 5 is furthering foreign policy objectives. Well, this is the especially some governments sometimes use trade policy to support their foreign policy objectives. America wanted to change the political regime long time of the Iraq. Iraq is now Saddam Hussein dead. It's okay. Cuba is still communist bloc, close to America. So US wanted to change this political regime. So therefore, US governments enacted not to have a trade with Cuba to benefit the Cuba. Against this US government policies, which means to have some barriers to have trade with Cuba, is the famous one is the Helms-Burton Act. This is a notorious act. Even Canada And other European countries didn't like this Helms-Burton Act because they had certain trade relations with Cuba. Well, this textbook's author is quite famous, quite fair. So they mentioned in certain pages, this probably the Helms-Burton Act is unenforceable. Well, though it still exists, but nobody wants to, especially Canadians. We are Canadians. Our government allows to have a trade relation with Cuba. Why we have to abide by the American law? So this is the Canadian insistence, all right? So as a political objective, to achieve political objectives, sometimes they use this kind of trade policies, right? Now, and then other things is famous is a political things is protecting human rights. Certain countries well, have very bad human rights notoriously. For example, the China also American government criticizing Chinese peoples are treated badly by the governments. The famous one is 1989 Tiananmen. I'm sorry, this is the real pronunciation, Tiananmen, but its Chinese pronunciation is Tiananmen Square Massacre in China. That was 1989. Okay. After famous Cultural Revolution finished, 1975, China has opened up their country and then encouraged the trades, and then especially the students, the general public wanted more freedom, and they had a great demonstration in Tiananmen Square. Well, then the governments suppressed it using tanks and arms. This is a terrible human rights problems. America criticized it. Well, in that case, they will stop the most favored nation status. You know that most favored nation status is if you have a most favored nation status agreement with Japanese governments or some other countries, well, Japan has given some favored good trade agreements with some other countries, and then that agreement will be also applied to your country. So therefore, you are always enjoying the best favored terms. That is most favored nation status. That's MFC. So America stopped to give MFC to China because of this Tiananmen cases. China is continuing also the famous one, subjugation of Tibet. China occupied Tibet, as you know, 1950s. 1950s is a famous year when North Korea invaded South Korea, and also Chinese volunteer army also invaded into South Korea, 1950s. So almost world people eye focused in the Korean War. During this time, China advanced into Tibet. As you know, Tibet is now occupied by the China. So that is also the international problems. So most of the countries have criticizing human rights problems, and because by the youth, the reasons of this human rights, and then they put the pressure on the other serious, harsh agreements to the trade agreements. And also the other one is protecting the environments. Well, there are lots of things, friends of us and Sierra Clouds, and famous one is a Kyoto Protocol 1997, but US and China didn't sign it. But Copenhagen Agreement thereafter, about say 10 years later, 2009, this time US and China signed it. But still there are very, say, in a sense, lax or loose countries to protect environments. For example, Mexico is pollution law is rather not too harsh, strict. Okay, and some other manufacturers is a very much encouraged because Environment Protection Acts and it's very strict. Then investor has to spend lots of money. In Japan is also air pollution law is very strict. So therefore, to not to have hydrocarbons also, so therefore the cost will goes up. So, for example, because of this, Mexico will be saying that something like a pollution haven. Well, some other things, oil productions. While the Middle East oil is crude oil so cheap, one of the reasons is the Environment Protection Act is not so strict comparing with the North Sea or oils or somewhere. Okay, that was I've heard when I was in the Middle East. Now, these days, Middle East is very fussy about these things, but still, these. Okay, now this is a kind of the explanations, income levels and the environmental pollutions. Okay, pollution levels, if income, GDP or national income goes up and the industrialized more, then the people's income goes up. Then, of course, there are lots of industries going up, so pollution will goes up. Okay, this is it. So threshold is something like $8,000 per year. Pakistan, I don't know. It's about how much is this per head incomes? Something like per income, $1,000, $1,200 something. But up to $8,000, pollution will goes up. Okay, and thereafter, the general public is very fussy about it, and then the pollution levels is going down. That is it. But the other effects, carbon dioxide emission, which is energy, mostly by the cars, these ones is continuous because automobiles are numbers of the automobiles is increasing. So therefore, it's continuously going up like this. Okay, this is something like one of the statistics. Okay, international business. Well, textbook 30. Textbook in the number 30s, all right? Okay, we'll take that as sorry. I just interrupted you. How many? Okay, 15. It's about half of you are attending. Okay, so now, so far, political arguments for the government interventions I discussed. So far, do you have any questions?
No, sir.
No. Pakistan's per head income is about say $1,200 something. So therefore, far much below 8,000. So your pollution is still increasing. So anyway, I remember when I was young, it's about say 1968, 67. This is the worst year in the Japanese pollutions. In Tokyo area, there was a cold smoke. It's about say 1,500 meters in Tokyo. When we are walking, there are smoky, and then couldn't see well, and then students or pupils and elementary school, high schools, when they are exercising in the athletic field, sometimes they fainted. So our governments became very fussy about this pollutions, and now it's the Tokyo's air became better, far much better now. Well, this is happens in a certain area. Probably in Karachi is probably in Pakistan is the worst, and also China in Peking is a terrible air pollutions right now. Okay, now second one, economic arguments for intervention. Well, economic argument, there are lots of justifications. We have to encourage infant industry things, arguments. South Korea and Taiwan was very successful for industrializations. Okay. There are lots of reasons, but this is not a development economy course, so I can't touch on so much. And then also strategic trade policy arguments. This is used for America or UK or in Japan, anywhere. Well, the famous one, first mover advantage. US government subsidiary to Boeing. Boeing is a famous airplane manufacturers. Also, Boeing is a famous for the supplier to the defense, US Air Force or so something. 1950s and 60s, huge subsidiaries. Okay. Well, that is a strategic trade policy arguments. All right. The other ones is rather not so good ones. It's America is also giving so much big subsidies to the Japanese American agriculture sector. Some of the Americans said 40% of the American agriculture products is subsidized by the American government. If they don't subsidize, American crops and wheat and agricultural goods price becomes doubles. Well, we are enjoying the cheap agricultural goods. It's good, but suffering, the American taxpayers are suffering. Well, forward to the fast movers, okay? For example, to Airbus, Great Britain, France, Germany, and Spain gave altogether $15 billion subsidy to this Airbus development. Well, to catch up to the America. Boeing is also monopolizing the jumbo jet or something. So to counter this, European side developed Airbus. Okay, these ones, the economic arguments for interventions. Okay. Now, these things happens. There are some critics. I don't know the name of the famous economist, Krugman. I'm not sure you know his name. He is a very fussy man and speaks loud, lots of phrases. There are lots of, he says, I'm not a politician, but it very much makes lots of comments about political issues. Well, this kind of trade wars, each government wants to give some strategic industries for their subsidiaries or something. Krugman says strategic trade policy is something like a beggar thy neighbor. What does it mean? Okay, beggar thy neighbor. Leading to the trade war eventually. Okay. How to avoid this? Well, each government, well, we think it is our aeronautics industry is a strategic industry. We have to let them grow. Okay, give a big subsidies. Japan also gave a big subsidies to the oil exploration area. I worked for that area, so I know this. Well, and then there are other nations, domestic policies. Governments sometimes do not act always in the best interest of their country, especially for its consumers. Special interest group will distort it to their own ends at the expense of the consumers. Okay, you noted that. So these are the things happens. Then how to cope, how to avoid? Well, we'll discuss later stage. And then development of the world trade system is also one of the solutions. Then how to solve it? Well, this is the end of that. So I'll stop it here. You have any discussions or questions, or even in regarding the lecture number 1 and 2, just freely. What do you think today's lecture? Do you have any questions?
No, sir.
Adam?
No questions, sir.
No questions?
No,
Okay.
sir.
In that case, I will suggest you in a normal class time, I deliberately didn't use this kind of PowerPoint things because if I supply this one to you, then you don't read the textbooks. But I still insist you have to read textbooks very carefully. There are lots of areas which was not covered in my lecture and even in the PowerPoint. So you have to read carefully for the textbooks. Okay, textbooks is very much well written. Okay,
Okay, sir.
and just to I'm try to help you to understand the behind the textbooks. So any questions from your side? If you don't have, and then next sessions you can ask to me. Okay. Today I had a lot of controversial areas. I discussed this political areas. So all right. If you don't have, and then I will stop it today. Okay.